My fusion system, fusing 1,000 chickens at the start. Chapter 521, Reinforcements. At the fortress city in the south of the Holy Dragon Kingdom. At that moment, the fortress city had been entirely occupied by the elves, and the city was in a bleak state. All of you, behave yourselves. Don't think about escaping or resisting. Cooperate obediently, and we can spare your lives. Otherwise the soldiers who had just been captured were transferred to a refugee camp. An elderly elf was lecturing them. His grey beard spoke of the passage of time. His resolute face and powerful aura made the soldiers furious, but they did not dare say anything. General Erland, all the residents and wealthy people in the city have been controlled. His Majesty has issued an order to us. He wants us to find those who have relatives in the nearby cities and bring them out of the city. He wants the people in the nearby cities to pay a ransom for them. We don't need the ransom, we want to use those people to attack the nearby cities. An elven soldier quickly said in a low voice, "Didn't His Majesty discuss with the Winter Nation about attacking the Holy Dragon Kingdom together? Isn't it too much pressure for us to attack by ourselves? Don't we need to wait for news from the Winter Nation?" His Majesty said that there's no need to wait for them. Since the Winter Nation hasn't made a move yet, they won't make a move for a short time. Perhaps they're deliberately waiting for us to clash with the Holy Dragon Kingdom so they can sit back and reap the benefits after we both suffer heavy losses. His Majesty said that now is a good opportunity for our Elven Kingdom. We're not dead, so we can easily take down the Holy Dragon Kingdom. It's good that the Winter Nation doesn't participate this time. In that way, the Holy Dragon Kingdom will soon belong to us. The young elven soldier revealed a smug look on his face, and his eyes lit up. Within a short hour after the Elven Kingdom's army entered the city, they had killed all the higher UPS and some soldiers. It was not as if they did not meet some resistance, but it was not enough to defeat them. Even when the elves were killed, they only needed a few seconds to be revived again. They were still standing even after their enemies hacked them into pieces. More than 100,000 soldiers were fighting them when they first entered the city. However, that number was quickly reduced by half. In fact, the garrison army even gave up fighting. They had seen how the elves they killed would just get up uninjured again and again. The entire city was filled with panic. The Elven Kingdom had never won against the Holy Dragon Kingdom for hundreds of years. However, they had beaten the Holy Dragon Kingdom, so it stimulated the elves' morale. After occupying the other nearby cities, we need to find the rich and powerful young masters and young ladies in those cities. Let them head toward the direction of the royal city, and we can attack the cities along the way. Their soldiers will not act rashly when they see the people with us. We can use poison and let some virus break the humans' defense line in the future. His Majesty has already asked us to start developing a poison that is only harmful to humans but ineffective against elves. I didn't expect His Majesty to have already planned that far ahead. Go back and report to His Majesty that I will cooperate with his plan. The general named Erland nodded and looked into the distance at the white smoke rising from the city's ruins. The Elven Kingdom had 12 elders. The 12 Elven elders formed a parliament and could judge national affairs. As long as the elders unanimously approved a proposal, even the king could not veto it. As one of the 12 Elven elders, his duty was to be in charge of military affairs. He was also one of the few elders who followed the Elven king on that expedition. 8 of the elders favored the attack on the Holy Dragon Kingdom. 4 of them were against it. The 4 who are against it have all been removed by His Majesty. It seems like His Majesty is not only attacking the Holy Dragon Kingdom, but is also displeased with those anti-war elves. If I can't satisfy His Majesty in this battle, I'm afraid that I'll end up like those elders. Erland looked at the people in the refugee camp who were covered in dust. Some of them were missing some limbs and were moaning weakly on the ground. Some of them could not find their children, and some children had lost their parents. Their eyes were numb, and occasionally, their eyes were full of hatred. In the face of that scene, Erland could do nothing but sigh in his heart. He was not a general who liked to fight. As an elf, he was born to love nature and maintain a peaceful nature. Most elves were like that. Other than the soldiers killed in the first confrontation with the Elven army, the subsequent residents were taken under control, they were not massacred. There were always exceptions. Erland, you're still dawdling. Didn't His Majesty ask you to choose people related to people in the surrounding cities? If you don't want to choose them, why don't you let me do it? In any case, I've killed 100 people in this battle, and I've already received His Majesty's praise. Perhaps I'll be promoted to your position very soon. A sharp and repulsive voice rang out. A thin elf with a sunken face and a long tongue sticking out of his mouth slowly walked toward Erland. That elf carried a blood-red longbow on his back, and 2 human heads hung from his waist. It seemed like the 2 humans had died not long ago. The elf licked his tongue after arriving in front of Erland, and a red glare flashed in his eyes. Kid, that is my job. I don't need you to interfere. Erland frowned. The elf named Kid patted his shoulder and said, We are working for His Majesty. Don't be so stingy. Then, they came to the refugee camp and grabbed a teenage boy. Do you know if any of the people around you are related to anyone from the nearby cities? I don't know, the boy answered with a trembling voice. You don't know? That is not the answer I wanted. The corner of his mouth rose. Kid took a dagger and held it against the boy's neck. Do any of you know? Those who know better step forward now. As long as someone steps forward, I'll let him go. Otherwise, I'll count to 3. If no one steps forward, this boy will be dead for sure. Then, I'll count to 3 and kill one person at a time until all of you are dead. His calm words contained a terrifying killing intent that reverberated through the surroundings. Everyone shivered and clenched their fists. 3, 2. When Kid was counting, no one moved. That caused a cold glint to flash across his eyes. He pressed the dagger a little harder, causing it to cut through the boy's neck. Fresh blood seeped outward. 1. Erland glanced away when the final count fell because he knew the boy was about to die. At that moment, crack! A loud sound came from the ground. A crack had appeared where Kid was. A golden stream surged outward and hit him between his legs, suffocating him. He stopped what he was doing. What's going on? Chapter 522, Show of Power. Why did the ground suddenly split open? And there's golden water flowing inside. It was not just Kid. Everyone, including Erland, had puzzled looks on their faces. Just as they were puzzled, a stream as thick as a human head shot out from the crack and crashed heavily into Kid's legs. His eyes instantly became bloodshot, and he let go of the youth in his hands in pain as he held his crotch and took a few steps backward. Bang! Bang! At the same time, the ground in the city began to crack. Many fountains as thick as a human head shot out of the ground. That scene caused panic among the Elven army in the city. What's going on? Why did the ground suddenly crack? Are we under attack? You humans! Behave yourselves! Don't act rashly, and don't think about escaping. The Elven soldiers raised their longbows and nocked their arrows. Arrows that flickered with light appeared instantly. The humans did not dare to move. However, that situation only lasted for a few short minutes because soon, the ground beneath the humans also collapsed, and streams of golden water flowed out like fountains. Those golden streams quickly gathered, forming a crisscrossing river that separated the fortress city. A few black deep-sea submarines emerged from the river. Just in time. Fortunately, the Elven kingdom did not massacre the citizens. Otherwise, it would not be enough to appease their anger even if we were to kill you. Watson stood on a submarine, supporting a young man. That young man was the one Kid had grabbed and threatened. At that moment, the fear in his eyes had not disappeared, and more confusion appeared in his eyes. Besides the black, strange thing under Watson's feet, he saw many sea folks with fish tails. All those sea folks held trident-shaped weapons in their hands, coldly looking at the elven army around them. Are those the sea folks? Do the sea folks also want to attack the Holy Dragon Kingdom? That's not right. Look at what the young leader said. Those sea folks are not here to attack us but to help us. But why would the sea folks help us? Many of the residents were puzzled. They thought the sea folks were similar to the elves. Those two races were threatening to humans. They were usually the slaves to the great noblemen in the kingdom. The sea folks also hated humans. Who would have thought that they would help them? Shameless brat! You joined the sea folks in ambushing me? How despicable! No matter who you are, I will not let you off for doing such a thing to the noble elf race. I am Kid, the deputy commander of the Elven army's 1st Legion, and I will kill all of you now. Kid, whose face was twisted from the pain of water hitting his crotch, walked backward and raised his sword at Watson, threatening him loudly. However, his walking posture was a bit awkward, and it was obvious that he had not fully recovered yet. You dare to be disrespectful to young Master Watson? Do you want to die? One of the sea folks snorted coldly and controlled the pale golden water current with his trident to rush toward Kid. In an instant, he arrived in front of Kid. Before Kid could react, the sea folk threw the trident in his hand. It pierced Kid's chest and caused a wave that stretched over 100 meters. Even the houses behind Kid and on both sides of the street shattered, forming a huge pit. The sea folk warrior maintained his posture like a god. There were no cries of surprise, only silence. He killed Kid in one move. A few seconds later, a voice rang out. Erlin's beard fluttered, and his eyes widened. As the deputy commander of his legion, Kid was an ambitious man. However, Kid had the strength to match his ambition, and he was only about 100 years old. That was a relatively young age in the Elven race. He was already a peak gold tier archer, and he also had the ability to transform into multiple magical beasts of the same level. Even as an Elven elder with platinum tier strength, it would not be easy for Erlin to kill Kid in one move. However, the sea folk in front of him could do so easily. He did not know how he obtained that strength. How could he not hear of his name before? After wiping the blood on the trident, the sea folk was about to return to the water after killing Kid. Then, Kid, whose chest had been penetrated and his corpse floating on the surface of the water, had recovered. The blood that flowed from his chest was bound by an invisible force and returned to his chest. Even his chest was quickly repaired to its uninjured state. That was close. If I had not consumed water from the spring of life, I would have died. Such a powerful attack requires the strength of a platinum tier elite. Only 3 people amongst the sea folks have such strength. Are you the leader of the sea folks, Poseidon, or the remaining 2 platinum tier elites? Kid was not in a hurry to attack. Instead, he asked the sea folks in front of him with interest. The sea folk warrior rolled his eyes and looked at him as if he was an idiot. He did not say a word. The look in his eyes stung Owen. If you don't want to say it, then just die. No matter who you are, even if you have the strength of a platinum tier, I will still kill you. Roar. As soon as he finished speaking, Kid's body squirmed. Layers of fine scales emerged from the surface of his body. In just a few seconds, he transformed from an elf into a giant lizard more than 10 meters long. The lizard had 2 blue horns on its head and a long fish tail swinging behind its back. The lizard was called the dragon-tailed lizard. It was a powerful magical beast at the peak of gold tier. It was a close relative of the water dragon, and dragon blood flowed in its body. After transforming, Kid quickly swung his tail and charged toward the direction of the sea folk warrior. With just a swing of his tail, he created a deep pit several meters deep on the ground. The tremendous power was shocking. The head of a platinum tier elite sea folk must be very valuable. His Majesty might reward me for that. Even though I'm not a match for a platinum tier elite, as long as I die a few more times, I'll be able to exhaust him to death. Kid's lizard tail smashed heavily onto the head of the sea folk warrior. The warrior calmly stabbed with his trident. The trident was like a mountain that shot into the sky. With a force of 10,000 tons, the distorted air turned into a storm that contained lightning and surrounded the sea folk warrior. A dark cloud that stretched for hundreds of meters floated out of the sky. With just one strike, it changed the weather in its surroundings. That was the symbol of a platinum-tier warrior. Bang! The violent stab and Kid's lizard tail collided heavily with a muffled sound, but the trident was unharmed. On the contrary, Kid's tail exploded in mid-air, turning into a bloody mist. With a painful howl, Kid's lizard curled into a ball and flew toward Watson, who was standing on the dark submarine at an even faster speed. Not good. The sea folk's expression changed. He hurriedly turned around. He realized that Kid had taken the initiative to break his tail to hit Watson. The brains of the sea folk's elites are really useless. I can indeed use resurrection to torture him to death, but who would be foolish enough to fight with him? To capture a thief, we must first capture the king. They don't even understand such a simple principle. Kid's vertical lizard eyes narrowed slightly, full of pride. The sea folks had protected Watson and were speaking for him. It was obvious that Watson was the leader. As long as they captured Watson, everything would be solved. Since Watson was only a teenager and Kid was quickly approaching him, he was stunned on the spot. He seemed to be scared. It was apparent that he did not have any strength. That made Kid somewhat proud. After I capture that youth, how should I torture him? Just as he was thinking about that, he saw the pitch-black object Watson was standing on the surface of the golden water rippled. A water pillar as thick as a human head gushed outward and hit the lizard's abdomen. It sent him flying. After landing on the ground, Kid transformed from a magical beast to an elf. He covered his legs with his hands and was sweating profusely. That water pillar hit the place where he had just been injured. At that moment, the pain in his body was not as severe as the shock in his heart. That was because he saw a sea folk family appearing from the spot where the water pillar had been shot forward. Following that, more sea folks appeared, along with more water pillars. There were more than 10,000 of them, and every sea folk exuded an aura that was not weaker than the warrior who had just fought with him. Chapter 523, So What If You Can't Die? Those 10,000 sea folks are all platinum-tier elites. I must be dreaming, Erland muttered to himself as he watched everything in front of him, his face pale. What made him even more shocked was that after the 10,000 sea folks appeared, they controlled the water flow to go to Watson's side and bowed respectfully to him. Under the protection of the many sea folks, a group of human ministers wearing official Holy Dragon Kingdom robes discussed animatedly. I did not expect that the magical water passage created by His Highness Watson really can teleport people to other parts of the kingdom in an instant. This is undoubtedly the southern fortress city. I've been here once when I was young, so I remember this place. The scenery here has become much more decadent. It's even controlled by the elves. When has the Holy Dragon Kingdom ever suffered such treatment? It's really a shame. Fortunately, we are here. Otherwise, I don't know what this city will look like under the elves' control. Some of the ministers who appeared with the sea folks expressed sympathy for the humans in the city, while some looked indignant. They rubbed their fists together and were ready to launch a heavy attack on the elves. Those people look extraordinary. Could they be the higher UPS of the Holy Dragon Kingdom? Seeing the sea folks, some of the elven soldiers in charge of guarding the city could not help but mutter. Why are humans with the sea folks? Aren't they supposed to be enemies? The other elves chimed in. The sea folks and humans had a feud. Humans often captured the sea folks' members as slaves, and the sea folks would also use songs to lure sailors out of the ship, dragging them into the sea to kill them. That was no secret. However, the sea folks seemed to be living in harmony with the humans. That surprised the elves, and their expressions turned ugly. The sea folks in front of them seemed very powerful, and they were not their match. If the sea folks and the humans had joined forces, their plan to attack the Holy Dragon Kingdom and destroy them would most likely fail. Stop joking. The humans are with the sea folks. What is going on? Forget it, I can't be bothered with that now. I want to kill all the Holy Dragon Kingdom soldiers. Since the Holy Dragon Kingdom has bribed the sea folks, let's kill them too. First Legion, listen up. Don't be afraid of death. Kill those people in front of me. We can't die. No matter how powerful the people are, as long as we persevere, we will be able to kill them. While the elves were still in shock, Kid covered his lower body and waved the weapon in his hand with great difficulty. He spoke loudly with a voice surrounded by a combat aura. Even though they did not understand why the sea folks had so many platinum tier elites, it was not the time to be concerned about those things. For the glory of the Elven Kingdom, for His Majesty, we will fight to the end. Fight! 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 Under Kid's instigation, the elves' fear for Watson and the others diminished. They had consumed the spring of life and gained eternal life. Even though their strength was forever fixed at the moment they drank the spring of life, the rewards were huge. Even if they were facing platinum tier elites, as long as they died 100 times, they would be able to cause a lot of damage. If they died thousands of times, they could even kill their opponents. After all, the platinum tier warriors were also living beings, they would tire and have weaknesses. The elven soldiers guarding the refugee camp followed Kid's voice and walked forward. They gathered in front of him. At the same time, many elven soldiers appeared in the streets and alleys. Those soldiers carried longbows on their backs. Their eyes were sharp, and their bodies were covered with wild totem patterns. Some were crouching in the streets, while others were standing on the roofs. They began to draw their bows and arrows, ready to shoot at the seafaring members. More and more elf soldiers appeared and transformed into powerful magical beasts. Their huge claws rubbed against the ground as they charged toward the sea folks. For a moment, the entire fortress city was filled with the roars of magical beasts. Roar! Protect His Highness Watson! The voices of the sea folks rang out almost simultaneously as the roars of the magical beasts. One by one, the sea folks waved their fishtails and held their tridents as they charged toward the elf druids who had transformed into magical beasts. The rolling sea water and the flying dust made the battle between the mermaids and the tree spirit like a magnificent epic, pulling people back to some ancient era. Watson was standing on the submarine, watching that scene with a calm expression as if he was a god overlooking the world. Under his gaze, the battle between the two sides suddenly erupted, presenting a one-sided situation. Most of the magical beasts that the elves transformed into were gold tier, with a small percentage being silver tier. In front of the platinum tier sea folks, magical beasts of that level were simply not enough. Usually, a trident that carried the power of wind and thunder would fall, crushing several magical beasts at the same time. The storm that stirred could even blow away other magical beasts within a radius of dozens of meters. More than 10,000 sea folks attacked one person at a time, and almost all of the elves had been eliminated. Most of the elves hiding on the streets or the roofs of the houses could not even shoot arrows at the sea folks. The waves deflected their bows and arrows. A small portion of the arrows landed on the sea folks, leaving only shallow wounds. Everyone, fight harder. As long as you can kill those sea folks, I will reward each of you with 100 gold coins. If you can kill more than 10 sea folks, I will propose to His Majesty for you to become my assistant. Kid was also among the elves that were attacking the sea folks. As he spoke, he pulled a trident stuck in his chest and threw it away. Looking at the wound on his chest that was rapidly recovering, his eyes greedily swept across the sea folks. He could see that the armor and weapons of the sea folks were of gold tier. Those precious items would be his if he could kill the sea folks. I'll let you guys fight for a while. When your energy is exhausted, it'll be our turn. At that moment, the number of elves that appeared on the streets was not less than the sea folks. The number continued to increase as they rushed toward the sea folks. Even though the sea folks had the power to kill them with one move, they could not hold back their numbers. Many ants could kill an elephant. That was the scene at that moment. A soldier at the forefront was suddenly pierced through the back of his head by 2 sharp arrows. His body fell limply into the golden stream, dyeing the water red. That sea folk's soldier fought bravely and killed the elves in front of him hundreds of times in a short period. Finally, due to his lack of stamina, he was ambushed and killed by more elves who had revived and rushed forward. We killed the first sea folk. A platinum tier elite? He's so average. The morale of the elves was high after killing the sea folk warrior. They sneered and looked at the other sea folks around them, including the Holy Dragon Kingdom ministers. The sea folks and the ministers had ugly expressions on their faces. When the elves killed the first sea folk elite, they could kill a second one. The sea folks would become weaker as time passed, but the elves would not suffer any losses. That would be their victory. The elves looked excited. Just as they were about to take down the rest of the sea folk warriors in one go, an arrow pierced through the back of their heads. The sea folk warriors who had fallen into the water shook their bodies and got out of the water. They pulled the arrow from the back of their heads and threw it into the water. It seemed like they were unharmed. As a platinum tier sea folk elite, it is too embarrassing to lose to that group of inferior tree spirit seeds. The surrounding sea folk warriors were not surprised at their companions' actions. Instead, they were mocking them. The sea folk warriors had a look of shame. What's going on? Why can't the sea folks die? Kid looked at the scene in front of him in a daze. His mouth was wide open. Not only did he stop talking, but the elves who had been clamoring had also stopped talking. The dead sea folks had been revived. What was going on? Had those sea folks also consumed water from the spring of life? While the elves were shocked, the sea folks who had just died turned their heads and looked at them coldly. Isn't it great that you're not dead? You made me embarrass myself in front of young Master Watson just now. In return, I won't let you die so easily later. Chapter 524, Elven Elites. D***MN. What kind of monsters are those sea creatures? It's fine if they don't die, but they're so powerful. How are we supposed to defeat them? It had been about 10 minutes since Watson and the others had arrived at the fortress city through the magical water passage constructed via the Dragon Palace. During those 10 minutes, the elven soldiers in the city had been defeated by the sea folk's trident. Blood splattered all over the ground, and the air was filled with panic. The sea folk's soldiers had the strength of platinum tier elites. 6 pure white wings appeared on their backs and floated in the air at that moment. As the wings flapped, white feathers shot out like sharp arrows. They broke the arrows shot by the elves. With a wave of their hands, huge waves appeared under their feet. Thick, dark clouds floated over their heads, and thunder roared. Under such a terrifying attack, the elves could not resist at all. They were constantly killed, resurrected, and then killed again. Despair gradually crept into the eyes of every elf. They could not die, but that did not mean that they did not feel pain. The pain of experiencing death time and time again was not something that ordinary people could endure. Initially, they could hold on because they thought they could grind the sea folks to death with their undying ability. However, after knowing that the sea folks' soldiers could not die, their desire to fight was significantly reduced. They initially thought that the sea folks that had just resurrected were an illusion. However, after the elves worked together to kill another sea folk, they discovered that all the sea folks seemed to have the ability not to die. After being killed, they could resurrect within a few seconds. That was precisely the same as them who had consumed the spring of life water. No, they were even stronger than them. After all, they did not have the strength of a platinum tier elite. The sea folks can deal with those elves. It seems like I don't have to do anything. Watson stood on the submarine with his hands behind his back and spoke slowly. When the kingdom's ministers and noblemen saw the scene in front of them, their expressions were somewhat complicated. After they arrived at the southern fortress city, they were worried that there would be a fierce battle. They were also afraid that the tens of thousands of sea folks that Watson brought along and the hundreds of submarines were insufficient. It seemed like they had overestimated the Elven army. The Elven soldiers were already retreating without Watson using the submarines. One person was able to resist the army of a kingdom. That was something that they had not dared to imagine before. That is the strongest genius in the kingdom, Watson. How terrifying, a nobleman muttered to himself. Not far from him, a white-bearded minister stroked his beard and nodded. An elite standing at the peak can have a huge impact on a battle. In the past, the Holy Dragon Kingdom had never been invaded by the other four kingdoms. On the one hand, we were protected by the natural moat, and on the other hand, it was also because of Reed, who could fight against an army by himself. Such an existence should be illegal on the battlefield. As Reed's disciple, his performance was even better than Reed's. It seems like they might be able to quickly expel the Elven Kingdom's army as Watson had expected. It's too early for a celebration. Watson's strength is very strong, but the Elven Kingdom is not without elites. Some people were not that optimistic. Instead, they shook their heads. As if to verify what those people said, a shocking roar came from within the fortress city. Roar! Then, a huge magical beast half the size of the city ran out from the center. That magical beast had a snake-like body, but it had 9 dragon heads. Each dragon head had a different color, and it had a single horn on its head. Some of its mouths were spewing flames, some of its horns were wrapped with lightning, and some of its nostrils were emitting poisonous fog. It was clear that each dragon head had a different ability. The magical beast's body was over 100 meters long and was not inferior to the average dragon. After it appeared, the 9-headed magical beast immediately opened its mouth and spewed lightning and flames from its dragon head. Lightning and flames interweaved and used the power of lightning to shatter the bodies of a few platinum-tier sea creatures. The remaining dragon heads also followed suit and attacked, biting the bodies of a few sea creatures into pieces and chewing them in mid-air. The moment they appeared, dozens of sea folks had died in the mouths of the magical beasts. One had to know that those sea folks had platinum-tier strength. To kill dozens of platinum-tier experts in one strike, such strength was terrifying. The moment that 9-headed serpent appeared, the entire battlefield suffocated. Even the powerful sea folk warriors stopped their attacks after sensing the diamond-tier aura emitted by that magical beast. The 9-headed heaven-devouring python is a diamond-tier monster. It's a secret druid technique mastered by the most powerful elder of the Elven race, Landon. It's said that when he was young, Elder Landon once killed a peak platinum-tier heaven-devouring python. He used its blood to cast a secret druid technique to improve the strength of the python that he transformed into. That python is just like the sky-devouring giant python when it reaches the diamond tier. It can only last for a short time, but it's enough for Landon. With Elder Landon here, those sea folks are nothing. The Elven warriors were all delighted when they saw the 9-headed giant python running out of the city. They were not a match for the sea folks because they were not as strong as them. Since their elder was there to help, they were stronger than the sea folks, and the battle situation would be reversed. Erland, His Majesty ordered you to pick up the captives and attack the other cities. Why are you standing in a daze? If His Majesty finds out about this, I'm afraid he won't let you off. Forget it, you can leave. I'll handle that here. The 9-headed snake was chewing on the bodies of the sea folks as it approached Erland. It spoke in a muffled voice. Wait a moment. Don't make a move yet. Before you understand the situation, why don't you negotiate with those people first? Erland looked anxious and wanted to say something in response to Landon's words. He had been there all those while, so he saw it when the sea folks and the Holy Dragon Kingdom's upper echelons had suddenly appeared. Then, the sea folks' elites immediately suppressed the Elven warriors. It was apparent that those people had come prepared. The strange black objects submerged under the water also gave him a feeling of oppression. Before he could figure out why the sea folks had so many platinum-tier elites and what those black objects were, it would be very dangerous to act rashly. Unfortunately, Landon did not listen to him. Instead, he revealed with a disdainful look. Negotiate? Erland, you're good at everything, but you're too weak. We've consumed water from the spring of life and are now immortal. What's there to worry about? Besides, the magical beast that I transformed into has diamond tier abilities. Is there anyone here who can hurt me? As one of the strongest elites in the Elven Kingdom, Landon could obtain diamond tier strength quickly. Even if he were no match for Sword Saint Reed, it would not be a problem for him to resist for a short while. Distorted lines appeared around the nine-headed heaven-devouring python that Landon had transformed into as he spoke. The symbol of a diamond tier elite is to grasp the rules. The magical beast I've transformed into has a special constitution and grasps 9 rules. If you're sensible, you'd better surrender obediently. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude. Bang! Before he could finish his sentence, the surface of the water suddenly churned. A giant pitch-black cannonball flew from the water's surface and hit the dragon's head. The black cannonball exploded in midair and turned into a black hole. Outside the black hole, Landon's dragon head became a bloody mess. Half of his head was missing. If you want to fight, then let's fight. Why are you talking so much nonsense? Watson crossed his arms as he stood on the submarine. The corners of his mouth curled into a smile. Chapter 525, Deep Sea Submarine Transformation. It was the Deep Sea Black Hole Torpedo. That was what Watson had used the Deep Sea submarine beneath him to launch. Its power was comparable to a full-force attack from a peak Platinum tier elite. Other than the Deep Sea Black Hole Torpedo, the Deep Sea submarine Watson had developed also possessed 2 types of weapons. They were the Deep Sea Thunder Cannon and the Ultra-High Temperature Scorching Ray. The Deep Sea submarine was different from the one Watson had developed for the Ptolemy family. He had reorganized the Third Era's technology from the human race chess piece. By combining the void ships that the Third Era had built with divine technology and the gold tier submarine, he had created that special submarine. A platinum tier deep sea behemoth submarine. This submarine was made from the remains of an ancient mythical creature. It had a mythical creature's activity and possessed the firepower of a magical weapon. Abilities: Deep Sea Transformation. The submarine can be activated into a third-era mythical creature to fight the enemy. Its attributes will be significantly enhanced. Mechanical form: the natural form of the submarine, with deep-sea black hole torpedoes, deep-sea thunder cannons, and ultra-high temperature scorching rays and other offensive means. Additional abilities: surface warping, can travel in a place with water, reaching any point within a short period. Self-awareness: the hull has a certain degree of self-attack ability, after all, it can self-repair after suffering damage. The information about the platinum-tier deep-sea behemoth submarines was reflected in his eyes. The knowledge contained within the race chess piece is indeed convenient. With that knowledge and my fusion ability, I can recreate the glory of the ancient divine era for humans. No, I can make human civilization further progress, Watson muttered softly. He had the human chess pieces, and he also had the fusion system. As long as he kept fusing the technologies, he would continue to progress. The human chess piece contained all the technology and knowledge contained in human history since ancient times. A few days ago, he had extracted the knowledge about ships from the Void Era and imparted to the sea folks. He had them create a vessel with a mythical creature as its shell, and he had the Ptolemy family build a submarine. He had also fused the two to make the submarine before him. At that moment, he wanted to test the power of that submarine. What powerful firepower! What exactly is that thing floating under the water? Could it be a new type of weapon developed by the human kingdom? The elves exclaimed when Elder Landon's nine-headed heaven-devouring python was injured. That pitch-black thing can transport both sea folks and humans. Is it some kind of ship? The other elves muttered. His companions quickly refuted his words. Don't be silly. How can that be a ship? Why would a ship be made of sealed, high-strength metal? Furthermore, most of them are submerged under the water. It must be some kind of magic cannonball that can be released underwater. No matter what it is, with such powerful firepower, I wonder if Elder Landon can handle it. Don't worry. Elder Landon is the strongest of our race. In front of him, those magic cannonballs are nothing. The nine-headed heaven-devouring python, whose head had been shattered by a single cannonball, was quickly regaining its original form while the elves were debating. Humans have actually developed powerful weapons. It really surprises me. Instead of working hard in cultivation, you always put your energy into strange things. Those weapons are good, but they will belong to us. Landon, who had recovered, looked at the submarines in front of him. Killing intent flashed in his eyes. He would kill the humans and take over their mysterious submarines. Then, he would use those submarines to attack the other human cities. That was what he thought. Is that so? Watson smiled and waved his right hand. Swoosh! Along with his movement, the top of the submarines extended outward like a huge barrel. The long barrel was made of platinum tier ore, and lightning surrounded it. The power of the void separated the space between the barrel and the barrel. Each submarine had 8 barrels, and at that moment, those barrels were all emitting a pitch-black luster. Then, pitch-black shells shot out of the barrels. A dense cloud of shells appeared in the air, densely covering the body of the nine-headed heaven-devouring python. If those shells were exploded simultaneously, they would turn into massive black holes, and everything within 1,000 meters would cease to exist. Even a powerful diamond-tier creature like the nine-headed heaven-devouring python would not be an exception. Just as the thousands of cannonballs were about to explode, the 9 heads of the nine-headed heaven-devouring python shook at the same time. Absolute defense. One of the heads, covered in rocks and had distinct edges and corners, with an earth elemental symbol on their heads, spat out its tongue. A translucent earth and yellow light barrier immediately appeared in front of it, blocking nearly 1,000 cannonballs. The cannonballs exploded on the light barrier. They turned into black holes, only causing the earth and yellow light barrier to shake slightly. I did not think that I would need to use the diamond tier power of law to deal with you. You should feel honored. There was a clear dividing line between diamond and platinum tier. The diamond tier was where one could grasp the laws and see the essence of the world. Under the laws, any so-called combat aura attacks and magic would be ineffective. The scene of Landon easily withstanding the bombardment of the submarine made the elves cheer. Meanwhile, the residents of the fortress city had looks of despair on their faces. When they saw Watson and the other humans and the sea folk army, they had a glimmer of hope that they would be rescued. It seemed like the Elven army was better than them. Not only were they not rescued, but even Watson and the others would die. Just as despair filled the refugees, Watson's lips curled upward. He said, "It's true that the power of law is strong, but who told you that you're the only one who has mastered the rules? Deep Sea Behemoth Submarine, activate Deep Sea Transformation." Following Watson's words, the pitch-black shells of the hundreds of deep-sea submarines suddenly began to squirm. The initially hard barrels were covered by the pitch-black shells, turning into greasy pitch-black tentacles. Meanwhile, the other parts of the submarine softened and grew scales like the unique coral and moss in the sea. The 100 deep-sea behemoth submarines had transformed in a short time. Some of those deep-sea behemoths had numerous tentacles, similar to an octopus, and some had long snake tails. Their bodies were similar to whales. The submarines made of different deep-sea behemoths also transformed into different mythical creatures. No matter what kind of mythical creature it was, at that moment, it was emitting a powerful aura of peak platinum tier. Many monsters gathered on the water's surface, shocking everyone in the fortress city, especially the elves. What's going on? Are those pitch-black iron shells actually transformed from monsters? Look at those monsters, each of them has a divine aura. Are they mythical creatures that have been extinct since ancient times? One by one, the elves cried out in surprise. The elves' secret druid technique allowed them to transform into monsters using flesh and blood as a bridge and enjoy the abilities of those monsters, and they were proud of that. However, they had never seen a non-living creature that could also transform into a beast. They had never even heard of it. At that moment, hundreds of deep-sea behemoth submarines turned into mythical creatures that lived in ancient times had crossed the surface of the water, carrying huge waves that were dozens of meters high as they crashed into the light shield in front of Landon. Hundreds of platinum-tier mythical creatures besieged a diamond-tier magical beast. The scene was shocking. A crack had opened up in the originally indestructible absolute defense law, under the siege of hundreds of mythical creatures. Chapter 526, Just one move. Impossible, that is absolutely impossible. Landon was under tremendous pressure at that moment, muttering to himself in his heart. He could see that the absolute defense law had cracked, and his entire body was about to split open as well. Is that Envy's great symbiote, the Leviathan? Landon's 9 gigantic snake heads looked in different directions. The 9-headed heaven-devouring python's heads shared the same line of sight and thought. At that moment, one of his heads looked to the front. There was a monster with barbs growing all over its back. That monster had a tail that looked like an anchor. Its long tail was covered with shadows and locked onto his body. A giant black vortex appeared under his body. It seemed like it was going to devour him. After being locked onto by the long shadow tail, Landon felt like his strength was weakened, from diamond to the platinum tier. As an elder, Landon often dealt with magical beasts, so he was very familiar with them. It was a very special magical beast that lived in the deep sea and mastered 2 types of magic, dark and water. It had a special ability called forced equality. Ordinary creatures could only master the rules after they reached diamond tier. However, some mythical creatures with powerful bloodlines could also master similar rules at platinum tier, for example, the absolute reflex of the angel race. Leviathan's forced equality could also be considered a type of rule. No matter how powerful the Leviathan's enemy was, their ability would be pulled to a certain level. Of course, the effect of forced equality would be weakened for enemies that were much stronger than Leviathan. However, not only one submarine had transformed into Leviathan. Among the hundreds of submarines, more than 10 monsters had transformed into Leviathan. More than 10 Leviathan released the forced equality simultaneously, which was enough to weaken Landon's strength from diamond to platinum tier. Landon would not have had such a difficult fight if it were just that. Leviathan was considered weak among the deep-sea behemoths that the submarine had transformed into. There was also a magical beast that was similar to an octopus. Landon thought that was more powerful. Its suction cup had attached itself to the light barrier formed by the absolute defense, causing the light barrier to shatter. The bubbles that shot out from its mouth, which was filled with fangs, collided with the absolute defense's light barrier, producing destructive ripples. D***MN, how on earth were those magical beasts created? Landon's heart was filled with fear. He was afraid of the power displayed by those submarines and the fact that humans could create submarines that could transform into monsters. The elves created the ability to transform into magical beasts. The archers of the human kingdoms also had similar capabilities. Those were all learned from the elves. In other words, humans had always been behind the elves. However, at that moment, humans had developed a method to transform objects into magical beasts. That was something that even the elves did not know. The fact that humans had unknowingly developed the elves' secret skills to a higher level made him feel fear. His Majesty's choice to attack the human kingdom was the right choice. I would not have realized that the humans had already achieved such a major breakthrough in our secret technique if not for this attack. After I destroy those humans, I will interrogate them properly. How exactly does that technique work? After making up his mind, one of Landon's 9 gigantic snake heads spat out flames. The firestorm that it spat out blocked a Leviathan swimming over, and while the other green snake head spat out a firestorm, it wrapped itself around its body and retreated some distance away. Activate the nine-headed heaven-devouring python's strongest ability. Nine-headed fusion, the colossus that can devour the world. Landon's 9 gigantic snake heads became illusory and intertwined in midair, turning into a snake head that was formed purely from pitch-black light. The illusory snake head did not seem to exist in that world, yet it seemed to contain supreme majesty. The moment the snake head appeared, the clouds in the sky changed as well. The clouds gathered together and turned into a ball that resembled the shape of a snake head. At that moment, the nine-headed heaven-devouring python that Landon had transformed into merged with the gigantic clouds above his head, turning into a body that was hundreds of times larger. Then it suddenly fell and devoured the hundreds of platinum-tier deep-sea magical beasts on the ground. The violent impact left a deep pit that stretched for thousands of meters on the ground. Everything in the deep pit was destroyed. The hundreds of deep-sea submarines were thrown back to their original state, becoming dilapidated. The airwaves also swallowed the houses around the deep pit. They were peeled off layer by layer. The ground and the sea tide that penetrated the ground were sliced off by a few meters. With just one stroke, 1/3 of the fortress city had disappeared. The bodies of several sea folks nearby evaporated, and they were resurrected in some places further away. The humans and elves in the fortress city were shocked, speechless by that world-destroying scene. That is Elder Landon's true strength. He's too strong, an elf muttered to himself. The nine-headed heaven-devouring python that Landon had transformed into had an innate talent, which was to merge 9 heads into one. It could devour the world. For a short time, Landon would not be able to use his transformation. However, the effect was obvious. Under that move, all the strange weapons that had transformed into mythical creatures are eliminated. Next would be the humans. Without the protection of those strange weapons, those humans and sea folks would not be able to withstand a single blow from me. As the dust dispersed, Landon's elf-like body walked forward. His transparent wings flapped gently, and his old face was filled with pride. In front of the nine-headed heaven-devouring python's most powerful magic, the diamond-tier magic that could devour the world, even a diamond-tier elite could fall, let alone the platinum-tier magical beast that was transformed from a submarine. When he saw the submarine in front of him mixed with the flesh of the magical beast and the mechanical remains, his expression became more proud. He walked toward Watson. "Brat, it's time for you to surrender. If you surrender voluntarily, I can still let you live. If you don't surrender. If I don't want to surrender, what can you do about it?" Watson stood on the rough water surface with his hands behind his back. The smile on his face was still there, but he was calculating in his heart. After his battle with Landon, he had seen the upper limit of the deep-sea behemoth submarine. It had surpassed the platinum-tier elites, and its power could pose a threat to the diamond-tier elites. However, it was not enough to kill diamond-tier elites. It had to be improved. If you don't surrender, then there will only be one outcome, and that is death. Landon snorted coldly and extended his right hand to Watson. His arm grew in midair, growing scales and turning into a dragon's arm. It extended for several meters. Since he had released the nine-headed heaven-devouring python's ability, he could not transform into nine-headed heaven-devouring python at that moment. However, that did not affect his transformation into other magical beasts. So, he transformed into a platinum-tier dragon that he had signed a contract with a few years ago. After seeing the powerful move he had released, Watson had a calm expression on his face. He was definitely faking it. Landon wanted to capture Watson and torture him before all the humans and sea folks. He wanted to let them understand how powerful the Elven race was. He had lost the will to resist. The huge dragon claw reached out toward Watson, who had lost the protection of the powerful submarine. He was like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. The human ministers standing around Watson were all in a daze as if they were scared silly when they saw the huge dragon was about to touch Watson. Bang! Watson raised his tender right hand and collided with Landon's dragon arm with a muffled sound. Watson's arm, which was obviously much smaller, did not move at all. Instead, Landon's dragon arm began to tremble, it seemed to have endured an unbearable force. What's going on? Landon's expression changed as he tried to pull his arm back. However, Watson's hand that was holding onto his arm did not move at all, making it impossible for him to pull it back. He thought Watson, who was only a teenager, did not seem to have much strength after losing the protection of the submarine. He would be able to deal with him easily. In the end, he realized that he was wrong. Elder Elven, you seem to have misunderstood something. You think that I'm standing here because I rely on the deep-sea behemoth submarine? Then you are gravely mistaken. The deep-sea submarine is just a toy that I created. The smile on Watson's face became brighter. He grabbed Landon's dragon claw and gently flipped his palm. Whoosh! Under everyone's watchful eyes, Landon, who had been showing off and destroying half of the fortress city with a single strike, flipped the moment Watson touched his claw. His head and feet were forcefully thrown to the ground, a deep pit was formed on the ground, and his eyes were in the shape of a vortex as he fainted. Watson had only used one move, and Landon had fallen. Chapter 527, Greeting the Dragon Emperor. Elder Landon. The surrounding elven soldiers looked at Landon in disbelief when they saw him fall at Watson's hands. Some of them tried to call out to him. Landon, the great elf elder and supreme elite, had been defeated by a human youth. How was that possible? It seemed like the young human had not used any particularly powerful abilities yet. Were they hallucinating? Feeling the gazes from all directions, Watson released his arm. Landon, who was in front of him, immediately collapsed. His dragon-like arm disappeared. Fusion system, activate. After defeating Landon, Watson did not continue with his attack. Instead, he began to fuse with the wreckage of the submarine that Landon's attack had shattered. The wreckage that was already in tatters turned into streams of light and fused together, turning into brand new submarines that floated in the air. They were filled with a sense of oppression. Everyone from the Elven Kingdom, I'll give you two choices. Hand over the hostages in the fortress city and surrender yourselves. Or I'll kill all of you here. You have 1 minute to consider it. Watson raised a finger. As he spoke, hundreds of deep-sea behemoth submarines floating around him extended their cannons in all directions. The cannons flickered with pitch-black light as if a cannonball would be fired at the next moment. His voice was not loud, but it reverberated throughout Fortress City. The Elven elites have been defeated. We're saved. The refugees in the cities had been under the control of the elves and had lost all hope of survival. When they heard Watson's call, they clenched their fists. Their eyes were filled with excitement. Compared to those refugees, the elves' expressions darkened. Elder Langton has lost. What should we do? Continue to attack. Under such circumstances, we aren't a match for him even if we continue to attack. Why don't we rely on our undying ability to protect His Majesty and retreat? Negative comments spread among the elven soldiers. Just as the elves were hesitating whether they should continue to fight Watson or not, the sky in the city suddenly emitted a dragon's roar, and hundreds of giant dragons rose into the sky, with elves on their backs. One of the elves wore a long emerald robe and a crown studded with gemstones. He looked majestic and gave off a lifelike aura. That elf was the king of the Elven Kingdom, Jersey Alpha. I did not expect the human army to come to the fortress city to provide support so quickly. I also did not expect the king of the Holy Dragon Kingdom to come personally, risking his life for a city on the border. Are you really bold, or do you look down on the Elven army? The Elven King rode on the dragon and arrived at where Watson and the others were in a few seconds. He glanced down, and his gaze stopped on Watson. Then, his gaze shifted to King Landar III, who was not far from Watson. King Landar III had met the Elven King before. When the Elven King saw King Landar III, surprise flashed in his eyes for a moment before it was covered with hatred. The Elven Kingdom attacked the Holy Dragon Kingdom to help him take revenge on them. King Landar III's appearance had saved him the trouble of destroying the Holy Dragon Kingdom cities one by one or attacking the royal capital. When he was resting in the city hall, he heard the sound of intense fighting outside. Soon, a guard came over and told him that a human army had joined hands with the sea folks to attack them, and even their great elder, Landon, was defeated. He had been very confused. The Elven army had consumed the water from the spring of life to become immortal, so they should not have been defeated. All the worries in his heart had disappeared. King Landar III was there personally, so it was natural for him to defeat Landon. King Landar III was a king. If he could not do that, there was no point in defeating him. The corners of the Elven king's mouth rose, and his smile was cold. He wanted to see King Landar III struggle and kneel in front of him. King Landar III? The king of the Holy Dragon Kingdom has come personally. Is that true? Since His Majesty has said so, it must be true. It's no wonder those people are so powerful. It turns out that they are protecting their king. Many Elven soldiers on the street cried out in surprise after the Elven king's voice fell. Even the residents of the fortress city were shocked. Then, their expressions turned into ecstasy. They did not expect King Landar III to come to save them personally. With the king present, the chances of them being saved skyrocketed. King Jersey, I haven't seen you in a long time. The last time we met was more than 10 years ago. After so many years, you look much older than before. King Landar III raised his head. His gaze met with the Elven king in midair as he said with some emotion. King Landar III, stop pretending. Since you're here today, don't leave. It was you who led your men to defeat Landon, right? As far as I know, the only person in the Holy Dragon Kingdom who can defeat Landon is Sword Saint Reed. Stop hiding and let him come out. The Elven king snorted and looked around for Reed. Even though he did not see Reed, he knew that he was there because King Landar III had come to the fortress city. King Jersey, I'm afraid I have to disappoint you. Reed is not here today. He's not here? Do you think you can fool me? If Reed had not come, who was the one who defeated Landon just now? When the Elven king asked, many elves turned their eyes toward Watson. Sensing the movements of those people, the Elven king narrowed his eyes and looked at Watson. He had noticed Watson because he was a teenager among a group of luxuriously dressed human noblemen and ministers. However, he did not think too much about it. It seemed like that youth was the one who had defeated Landon. You defeated Landon? The Elven king could not help but ask. Watson's age and the weak aura emanating from his body meant he did not look like an elite at all. Did King Landar III try to mislead him? That's right. Let me introduce myself. My name is Watson, and I am a. It doesn't matter who you are. Don't think that you can strut in front of me just because you defeated Landon. I have already made ample preparations for the attack on the Holy Dragon Kingdom. Fellow dragons, it's your turn now. Without waiting for Watson to finish speaking, the Elven king interrupted him impatiently. He waved his hand, and the dragons beneath him immediately carried him to the ground. After placing him and the Elven guards down, those dragons immediately transformed into human forms and flew in Watson's direction. More than 100 dragons flew in the air. Each dragon exuded the aura of a dragon king, and the terrifying aura made the air sticky. The residents of the fortress city, who had looked hopeful because of Landon's loss, looked desperate. Any of those dragons seemed to be stronger than Landon, and there were 100 of them. Even Sword Saint Reed was no match for them. Furthermore, King Landar III had not brought Reed with him. The Elven king stood behind the dragons, hugging his shoulders with a smug look on his face. Those dragons were all subordinates of the Forest Dragon King. Not only did they possess the strength of a dragon king, but they had also consumed water from the spring of life. They were immortals. 100 dragons were enough to flatten the entire Holy Dragon Kingdom. The scene of everyone present, including King Landar III, being torn apart by the dragons, began to appear in his mind. However, he was surprised when those dragons did not make a move. Instead, they knelt on one knee and spoke respectfully. "Greetings, Dragon Emperor." "What?" The Elven King opened his mouth wide. Chapter 528, The Elven Race Chess Piece. The Dragon Emperor. "What Dragon Emperor?" Seeing the dragons kneeling in the direction of Watson and the others, all the elves were stunned. The human ministers also looked at each other in surprise. "Who is the Dragon Emperor? Is he referring to His Majesty? I think those dragons are talking about His Highness Watson. Have you forgotten? A few days ago, when the 7 gods rebelled, it was His Highness Watson who summoned an army of angels, the sea folks, and the dragons to stop the riot. Apparently, His Highness Watson is related to the dragons. Even if Watson is related to the dragons, he should not be called the Dragon Emperor, right? What is a Dragon Emperor? I've only heard of the position of a Dragon King in the dragon race, but I've never heard of a Dragon Emperor." A group of ministers whispered to each other. Watson was unmoved when he heard those words. He had long known that the Forest Dragon King had signed a contract with the Elven Kingdom, asking the Dragon Clan to help with the invasion of the Holy Dragon Kingdom. However, he could not show it. He immediately waved his hand and was about to say something. At that moment, swoosh! With a muffled sound, a streak of light blazed across the sky. A faint green light bloomed in the air, turning into a world tree-like gate. The Forest Dragon King walked out of the gate. After the Forest Dragon King appeared, the many dragons lowered their heads even more, showing respect. So those dragons are paying respects to the Forest Dragon King. That frightened me. The Elven King touched his chest. When the dragons paid their respects to the ministers of the Holy Dragon Kingdom, it really made him break out in a cold sweat. The dragons were his pillar of support. If he lost their help, it would be very difficult for him to conquer the Holy Dragon Kingdom. Fortunately, the dragons were not paying respects to King Landar III and the others. How could mere humans and sea folks have the right to make the proud dragon race kneel? While muttering in his heart, the Elven King smiled at the Forest Dragon King and said, "Forest Dragon King, you're here. Those dragons just called you the Dragon Emperor. Is that a new form of address within the Dragon Clan? Or did I hear it wrongly? Are they actually talking about the Dragon King?" The Forest Dragon King did not respond. Instead, he turned around and knelt on one knee in the direction of the humans, like King Landar III. Forest Dragon King, Rita, one of the 8 Dragon Kings, greets the Dragon Emperor. Even the Forest Dragon King knelt. That scene made the Elven King swallow his words. He thought that the dragons were kneeling to the Forest Dragon King. Since the Forest Dragon King had knelt, it was obviously not what he thought. The Forest Dragon King was the highest judge of the dragon race, and she had the ability to make him kneel. Where did that Dragon Emperor come from? The elves were also surprised, and their eyes were filled with panic. They had dared to attack the Holy Dragon Kingdom partly because they could not die, but more importantly, because of the help of those dragons. If there were a so-called Dragon Emperor of the dragon race in the upper echelons of the Holy Dragon Kingdom, then their attack plan would be ruined. While many elves were panicking, they saw King Landar III shake his sleeves, cough with a dignified expression, and walk out of the crowd. "Well, since things have come to this, I won't hide it anymore. King Landar III, you are the Dragon Emperor? So you have been colluding with the dragons all this while? That means that you already knew that we had asked the dragons for help during the attack on the Holy Dragon Kingdom. You set me up." The Elven King's mind was in a mess, and many scenes flashed through his mind quickly. The Forest Dragon King had signed a contract with the elves, saying that they would attack the Holy Dragon Kingdom with them. However, before they arrived at the Holy Dragon Kingdom, the Forest Dragon King had to make a trip to the Dragon Clan's lair in the Holy Dragon Kingdom. After returning, the Forest Dragon King and the other dragons did not say much, but he could feel that those dragons had become stronger. In addition to the rumors from the Holy Dragon Kingdom, King Landar III had signed a new contract with the dragons, expanding the number of dragon knights from 10 to 100. He did not know what kind of deal he had with the dragons. That made the Elven King wonder if King Landar III had given the dragons a lot of benefits to become their dragon emperor. Perhaps it was just a conspiracy to get the Forest Dragon King to contact him and sign a contract with them, just to make the dragons betray him at that moment. King Jersey, you still look very confused. Let me answer your questions. King Landar III placed his hands behind his back and was about to continue speaking in a calm tone. Before he could finish speaking, the Elven King gritted his teeth as translucent elven wings appeared on his back. The wings flapped, and a peak platinum tier aura burst forth, causing him to turn into a streak of light and fly toward King Landar III. Shut up! I don't need you to explain that. King Landar III, are you trying to humiliate me by saying that? Only one of us can live today. Having already determined that King Landar III was the Dragon Emperor, the Elven King's eyes were bloodshot. It seemed like the Forest Dragon King and the other dragons had already turned against him. Their plans to attack the Holy Dragon Kingdom in the future would not go smoothly. It would be better to kill King Landar III then. King Landar III was right in front of him, and the guards around him were not very strong either. That was an excellent opportunity. As for the dragons, he was confident that he could pass through them. The Elven King took out an emerald green incomplete chess piece from his robe with a ruthless expression. That chess piece was shaped like the trunk of the world tree, and a lively aura surrounded its branches and leaves. There were faint, colorful microelves surrounding the chess piece. When that chess piece appeared, the sky immediately turned emerald green. The illusion of a world tree formed by endless starlight occupied everyone's line of sight. Distant elven ancestor, please listen to my summons. I will use my bloodline as the price to release the power of the race chess piece. I look forward to the arrival of our ancestor to eliminate the enemy in front of me. Flower petals grew out of the illusory world tree above the Elven King's head as he chanted. Then, they condensed into a crystal clear fruit. The fruit exploded, and an elven girl wrapped in light appeared. Her body was tall and sturdy, and her eyes contained the will to look down on the heavens and earth. I am the goddess of the tree spirits. I was born according to the wishes of my descendants. The elven girl stretched out an arm that was wrapped in light, and the light on the arm quickly spread into twining vines. The vines tangled in the air, and they soon turned into a sharp sword made of trees that fell downwards. The sharp edge of the wooden sword that stretched for hundreds of meters cut a long crack in the ground. The entire fortress city was about to be split in half, and the humans and elves in the city began to tremble spontaneously. That was the suppression of a higher tier of life. The elven ancestor is also the goddess of the tree spirit that the Elven Kingdom has always believed in. She has great power and can dominate the power of nature. In front of the power of the god, no matter how powerful the enemy is, they can only be destroyed. Fortunately, even though the elven chess piece is incomplete, it can still cast the spell that was recorded in the ancient books to summon the ancestor. The wrinkles on the Elven King's face deepened. He had aged a few years, and it was as if the elven girl was absorbing the life force in his body. The elven chess piece in his hand was the elven race's most precious treasure. It could summon the elves' ancestor to descend, but the price was to consume his own life force. He had already drunk water from the spring of life to obtain eternal life. At that moment, he was still unable to hold on. The price he paid was also significant. At that moment, following the elven ancestor's attack, not only did a huge vine-wrapped divine sword fall from the sky, the ground also shot straight vines that emitted starlight, wrapping around King Landar III, making him unable to move. King Landar III, you must not have expected me to have a backup plan. If you want to blame someone, then blame yourself for being too conceited. Do you really think that just because you signed a contract with the dragons to become the Dragon Emperor, I won't be able to deal with you? The Elven King sneered. At the same time, a trace of doubt appeared in his heart. Was King Landar III the Dragon Emperor? Why did the dragons around him look indifferent when he made his move? Did they have the confidence that King Landar III would not be injured? That would be ridiculous. The Elven King was confident that even the powerful Forest Dragon King would not be able to stop him in front of the Elven ancestor. That was also why he dared to make a move against King Landar III. King Jersey, you seem to have misunderstood. When have I said that I am the Dragon Emperor? King Landar III did not panic when he was captured. Instead, he looked helpless. You are still trying to evade the question at a time like this. If you are not the Dragon Emperor, then who is? The Elven King retorted angrily as a tender voice suddenly came from beside him. He turned around and saw that the person who spoke was Watson. The young man scratched his head and revealed a shy smile. I'm sorry. Actually, I'm the Dragon Emperor. The Elven King's gaze kept alternating between King Landar III and Watson, and he looked a little lost. Chapter 529, Evacuation. King Landar III, explain to me what's going on. After looking at King Landar III and Watson for a long time, the Elven King could not help but ask. He could not understand the current situation. He thought that King Landar III was the Dragon Emperor who had signed a contract with the dragons and that he was the mastermind behind everything. Then, he realized that the situation was very different from what he had thought. Why was King Landar III not the Dragon Emperor? That seemingly vulnerable youth in front of him had called himself the Dragon Emperor? Was that some sort of scam? However, things had come to that point, so what was the use of deceiving him? Furthermore, when King Landar III took the initiative to stand up when he mentioned the Dragon Emperor and said he wanted to explain it to him, that reaction was equivalent to admitting that he was the Dragon Emperor, right? King Jersey, I wanted to explain it to you just now. You did not give me a chance to explain. King Landar III looked helpless. Let me introduce you to the young man next to me. This is Watson. He is the strongest genius in the Holy Dragon Kingdom and the future heir to the throne. He is the Dragon Emperor you mentioned. Not only is he a dragon, but Watson is also the leader of the sea folks. He and the other ministers arrived at the fortress city so quickly because of the river that ran through it and the deep sea submarines that guarded the surrounding area. It was all thanks to Watson. King Landar III's voice was not loud, but every word was like thunder, slamming into the chest of the Elven King. It turned out that King Landar III was not the one who had planned all of that, but the youth called Watson. He would not have controlled King Landar III if he had known earlier. He would have turned around and killed Watson instead. Unfortunately, the ancestor he summoned had already locked his divine power onto King Landar III's body. The wooden divine sword floating above his head had already taken shape and was rapidly falling. It was already too late to change its target. The Elven King's expression changed a few times as he gritted his teeth. He said coldly, "It doesn't matter. Regardless of whether it's you, King Landar III, or the young man who did all that, you will all die here in front of our ancestors' great power. Elven King, we don't care if you target the human king, but we can't let you attack the Dragon Emperor. According to the agreement, I will help you attack the Holy Dragon Kingdom, but the Dragon Emperor is an exception. Strictly speaking, the Dragon Emperor is not a citizen of the Holy Dragon Kingdom, so you can't attack him." Led by the Forest Dragon King, the dragons kneeling stood up and glared at the Elven King. The Forest Dragon King flapped her hair and emitted a terrifying aura. "Forest Dragon King, you have already betrayed the agreement between us, and now you are lecturing me. Don't you think it's ridiculous? If I don't agree to your request, what can you do about it?" the Elven King sneered. He had already used his lifespan to summon the elves' ancestor. Even the dragons would not be able to resist the Elven ancestor's starlight tier divine power. The Forest Dragon King shook her head, and a smile appeared on her delicate face. The dragons are a race that keeps its promises. If we agreed to something, we would definitely do it. But if someone tries to break the contract, we won't forgive that person easily. Your Majesty, your words have troubled me. As she spoke, the Forest Dragon King extended her right hand toward the sky. With a light pinch of her slender fingers, a crack appeared in the middle of the huge wooden divine sword that stretched across the sky for hundreds of meters. The divine sword burned fiercely in midair and turned to ash. Not only was the divine sword damaged, but even the projection of the so-called Elven ancestor, who released the divine sword, was also heavily injured. A crack had appeared in her chest and lower abdomen. Following that, the body of the Forest Dragon King expanded and turned into the form of a dragon. The illusion of the elven chess piece that occupied the entire sky was immediately pushed aside by an even larger dragon-shaped creature. It was a dragon whose entire body was emitting natural light. The gigantic divine dragon that looked like a world tree was the Forest Dragon King's true form, the divine nature dragon. Its body was as thick as a tree trunk, and every scale on it was made of leaves. When they rubbed against each other, a crisp sound could be heard. Its entire body looked no smaller than a planet. What is that? Many elves in the stronghold city looked up at the sky with their mouths wide open. It was not just them, even the humans in the fortress city looked up at the sky as well. They were so shocked that they could not speak. It was the first time they had seen a dragon that was the size of a planet. It was rumored that dragons were the strongest creatures in the world, and the Dragon King was a powerful existence that stood at the head of the dragon race, possessing unimaginable power. They did not expect the real Dragon King to be so powerful. That is the strength of the Dragon King? No, that tier has clearly surpassed the Dragon King. The Elven King looked up at the sky. Under his gaze, the massive illusion released by the Forest Dragon King in the sky had already begun to move. Its star-sized body was surrounded by the projection of the elf's ancestor elf, and its tail wrapped around the projection's body. The divine nature dragon blocked the ancestor elf's divine power, and its body gradually broke under the dragon's powerful strength. First its forelimbs, then its neck. Soon, the ancestor elf's body was torn into pieces of different sizes, turning into green light and dissipating in the air. It only took a minute for that to happen. Then, the Forest Dragon King returned to her human form and fell from the air. She placed her palm on her chin and yawned as if she had just done a trivial thing. That is what happens when you attack the Dragon Emperor without my consent. As the ancestor elf's power dissipated, the sturdy vines that had bound King Landar III's body also shattered. King Landar III, who had escaped, moved his sore shoulders and tidied his clothes. King Jersey, your plan has failed. I can guess the reason for your attack. No matter what it is, you can no longer attack my kingdom. Why don't we sit down and have a good chat? After all, sit down and have a chat with you? Have you forgotten what the Holy Dragon Kingdom did to the Elven Kingdom? The Holy Dragon Kingdom had its achievements 400 years ago because your kingdom's great mage, Antonio, went to the Forest of Eternity and stole water from the Spring of Life. Then, more than 10 years ago, I let my daughter, Avril, marry you. In the end, my beloved daughter died tragically. How can I continue to trust you? King Landar III, this matter will not end like this. Just you wait. Sooner or later, I will destroy the Holy Dragon Kingdom. After coughing twice, the wrinkles on the Elven King's face deepened. Blood slid down the corner of his mouth, leaving a trace of red on the ground. It was a shocking sight. Obviously, the projection of the elf's ancestor had been destroyed by the Forest Dragon King, so he had suffered severe injuries. Fellow elves, activate the magical arrays that was set up in the city, and then leave. Chapter 530, Poisoned. The Elven King's voice spread throughout the entire city under the influence of the combat aura. Soon, the elves arrived at the houses in the streets and alleys, activating the magical arrays set up in them. For a moment, teleportation arrays of all sizes appeared in the city. Then, the bodies of the elves began to disappear as the arrays covered them. Meanwhile, the humans covered by those teleportation arrays were not affected in the slightest. The Elven army had set up those magical arrays after they had occupied the fortress city. They had occupied the fortress city for the past 2 days. They were not in a hurry to expand because they were setting up those magical arrays. Other than the teleportation arrays, they had also carved other magical arrays. After all, that was the first city that the elves had occupied. If they wanted to stand firm and use that place as a base to continue attacking the Holy Dragon Kingdom, they needed to turn that city into their base. Unfortunately, the magical arrays left behind by the Elven army were forced to be activated in just 2 days. King Jersey, please don't listen to rumors. King Landar III sighed after being interrupted. He wanted to say that Avril had been resurrected. If the Elven King had known that, he might not continue attacking the Holy Dragon Kingdom. Unfortunately, the teleportation array had already been activated. It was too late for him to say anything. You want to leave? Stay. Watson stood on the surface of the golden water and waved his finger. The hundreds of deep-sea behemoth submarines around him immediately activated their cannons and fired the deep-sea black hole torpedoes. The shells hit the elves and exploded into black holes, tearing many of the elves into pieces. Protect His Majesty. Seeing their companions' bodies being torn apart by the black hole bombs, the elves were still not afraid. They stood in front of the Elven King to block the damage of the black hole torpedoes. The Elven King's body disappeared into the air in just a few seconds, leaving only one sentence floating in the air. Don't waste your energy. The Elven chess piece powers the teleportation arrays in the city. Even if you kill me, I will be summoned by the power of the chess piece to the Elven Kingdom to be resurrected. You can't keep me here. Also, I have planted a platinum tier poison, the marionette poison, in most of the people in the city. Those poisoned will gradually be assimilated into plants that can't think and move within a week. If you want to cure those people, bring King Landar III and the young man who calls himself the Dragon Emperor to the Elven Kingdom to get the antidote. Remember, you only have less than a week. The voice disappeared, and the elves in the city were teleported away. The elves torn apart by the black hole torpedoes vanished into the air before they could be reassembled. Obviously, the Elven King was telling the truth. After those elves died, they would be summoned to the Elven Kingdom to be resurrected. Since Watson had the human race chess piece, he knew that it would be very attractive to the other humans. I can't believe that the Elven race still has their chess piece. I wonder about its effect. What kind of laws do they grasp? Watson muttered to himself as he watched the teleportation arrays collapse and the green light gradually disappear as the elves vanished. The Elven King had displayed the ability to summon the ancestor elf. He wondered if that summoning power was the Elven race's laws. Greetings, Your Majesty. Then, an army with tattered armor appeared in the city. The leader quickly walked in front of King Landar III and knelt on one knee. With an excited expression, he said, Greetings, Your Majesty. I am Fox, the city lord. Fortunately, you have arrived in time to chase the elves away, Your Majesty. We don't have to be their slaves. I have failed to protect the city, Your Majesty. Please punish me. The soldiers behind Fox lowered their heads, they looked ashamed. They had been controlled by the elves, and they had seen how King Landar III brought people to show off his might. After the elves left, they immediately rushed toward the king. The city's residents went with them. One by one, the citizens in shabby clothes knelt before King Landar II, their faces filled with the excitement of having survived a disaster. His Majesty came at the right time. I thought I was going to die. The Elven army is weak, indeed. His Majesty only brought so few people to defeat them. Those people should be His Majesty's advance troops. Long live His Majesty! Long live the Holy Dragon Kingdom! In response to the gratitude of those residents, King Landar III put on a smile and nodded at them. Then he looked at Fox, who was kneeling on the ground, and extended his right hand. Fox, as the city lord, you have failed to protect your people. Instead, you were controlled by the elves. You are guilty, indeed. Fox's face darkened. The king said, however, the Elven army came prepared for that attack. Not only did they consume water from the spring of life, but they also brought their precious treasures. Understandably, you are no match for them. In addition, under the control of the elves, you did not surrender and betray the kingdom. It is considered a meritorious service, so your merits and faults are offset. I will not punish you. Thank you, your majesty. The gloom on Fox's face turned into ecstasy. When the Elven king left, he said that he left the marionette poison on the residence. I wonder if that is true. Your majesty, there is such a thing, indeed. Even me and the generals were poisoned. Otherwise, they would not be at ease letting us live. Fox stretched his right hand outward and showed it to King Landar III. The thick armor was removed, revealing his thick forearm. His originally muscular forearm was pale green, and it had become soft. Wood veins had appeared on his palm, and he could no longer bend it. Soft grass grew between the gaps in his fingernails, and it seemed like if he touched the arm lightly, it would break. That is the so-called marionette poison. The effect is similar to what the Elven king had said. King Landar III narrowed his eyes and turned to look at Watson. Watson, do you have a cure for this poison? Your Majesty, that is a platinum-tier poison. It is very difficult to cure and is highly contagious. Previously, several healers in the fortress city had tried to crack that poison, but they had died, Fox said hurriedly, but his voice was a little nervous. Not only was that poison highly contagious, but if it were not forcefully neutralized, it would speed up the spell. He wanted to live. Previously, under the control of the elves, even though he noticed that Watson was being protected by the sea folks and called the Dragon Emperor by the Dragon tribe, he thought they respected him because he was the future king. Such a young man would not seem to have much strength, let alone be proficient in the healing arts.